Hello, students. Welcome to week 3. So what we have going on for week 3, our overarching topic, is general interventions and theoretical approaches to sexuality counseling. So you have a little bit going on this week, and so I'm going to try and cover everything. The first thing I want to note is that initially you were going to be reading Crooks and Bauer chapters 14, 17, and 18. I'm sure that you are not sad to hear that I cut 17 off this week. We're going to be actually covering it later in the semester, and so I thought rather than repeat it, we would kind of cut this week down to just chapters 14 and 18 from the Crooks and Bowers book. So, but we still have a couple chapters to cover. So to start off with our Crooks and Bowers text, we have chapter 14, which is sexual difficulties and solutions. And so this chapter gets into some of the different types of disorders that could possibly happen and people could possibly be presenting and counseling with. And so the first critical thinking question is, in what situations would you consider it normal for a man to lose his erection? In what context would you consider this difficulty to be a disorder? And so questions similar to this are things that we would have to consider when clients bring sexual problems to us, that there is this line between this is something that in that situation it makes sense that would happen, and when it is something that maybe a medical doctor should look into and we could do ongoing counseling related to. I think I had mentioned during our first Zoom meeting that situations like this can sometimes be related to other mental health stuff, which we're going to be talking about later in week 7. But there are some cases where additional counseling that specifically works with sexuality and sexual issues is important. And so that's sort of what this chapter talks about. Another critical thinking question is about the DSM-5. I'm using the criterion of an individual having experienced a sexual problem for at least 6 months, for at least months. Doesn't have 6 on there, but 6 months to be considered a sexual disorder. Do you think this period of time is the right time to identify that? And so kind of doing that critical thinking into, should an individual have to sort of suffer with or deal with that issue for a length of time to be considered a disorder, or could we be over labeling people with that disorder if they, if we take it for a shorter length of time? And so just kind of considering that and really thinking more in depth into that. There's lots of research out there on the DSM and diagnosis and things like that, sort of pro and for different aspects of it. And so you might be able to find some information there that'll be interesting. And so this chapter sort of breaks the difficulties down into categories. And so the first one is desire phase, excitement phase difficulties, which includes female sexual interest and arousal disorder, male hypoactive sexual desire disorder, erectile disorder, desire discrepancy, and persistent genital arousal disorder. So this is on becoming aroused or having issues becoming aroused or being interested in sexual activity. The next category is orgasm phase difficulties. So this is when there's difficulty either having the orgasm or not being able to orgasm. So premature ejaculation is one that we are commonly aware of. There's also female orgasmic disorder, male orgasmic disorder, and also it talks about faking orgasms and the impact of that. So the critical thinking question related to this area is, do you think it's okay for people to fake orgasms to spare their partner's feelings? Why or why not? And this one's sort of an opinion question, but it also gets a little bit into couples and relationship work, right? And so those of you who are going to be working with more than one person in a relationship with another individual, this may come up, right? And so it's really important to have some kind of idea of where your bias fits, and also recognize that the client might be coming from a totally different perspective. Another one is dyspareunia, which is a pain disorder related to sexual intercourse. And so this is includes the female genitopelvic pain and penetration disorder. It's it's when there's sort of no other issues going on, but there is pain when either in the pelvis area or actually in the vagina when penetration tries to occur. And so whether it's with an individual with a vagina and the penetration is with a penis or another object, the pain may be the same. In some cases, there is a difference, right? And so if it's a partner's genitals being inserted versus a like vibrator or something like that, some kind of sex toy, or if the interaction is with another person or not, sometimes that can make a difference. And so it goes in depth into that disorder as well. In addition, it gets into the topic of sexual addiction, which is sort of a topic that is highly debated. It is not a disorder that is in our DSM, and the reason is because according to ASECT, which is the body that oversees sexual therapists, they believe that sex addiction does not exist, and APA kind of stands on that foot as well. And so, what ways can we look at what we think of as sexual addiction that aren't in terms of addiction? And so that's sort of that debate. And there's actually some really great podcasts and blogs and things like that out there on that topic that you can find. Next, it gets into some of the origins of sexual difficulties, some factors that could be related to culture or individual factors, or the impact of what we've learned or experienced, abuse. It gets a little bit into culture's idea of what the normal, right, body dimensions are. I love the one image on 404. It shows like a Barbie doll, and then what like the Barbie doll would actually look like if she went by proportions of your average individual. It talks a little bit about the beauty culture. It talks about abuse, health habits, chronic illnesses, which is really important. Also, abilities and disabilities that can cause sexual issues. And there's also some really great videos and stuff you can find on YouTube with sexuality and ability. And I'll actually try to post those below also for you guys to look at. And then different strategies that can help, like self-awareness, sensate focus, specific suggestions it goes into, which is really awesome. Also with this lesson this week, you're going to have the resources from the Bueller text that are going to be really helpful interventions that you can use with clients. And you can use them to learn for yourself as well. So this is all treatment stuff. And then of course, at the end of your chapter, it has some information on resources. So our next chapter that we're going to be looking at this week is chapter 18, which is sex for sale. And so this also covers a wide gamut of topics. It covers everything from pornography, and it separates out like erotica and child pornography, because obviously there are different laws related to that. Variations between like straight, gay, and lesbian pornography, access and prevalence to it, the history of it, sex and politics, which comes into play a lot when it comes to sex for sale, as you'll find, depending on where politics and society stand, really has a big impact on this. Talks a little bit about our culture, whether or not pornography is harmful. And pornography is another topic that you can find a lot of great information. And again, I'll try to post some stuff below about whether or not pornography is healthy, either to the people that are engaging in it and producing it, or to the individuals watching it. And so that's a really great debate to look at as well. Then it gets into sex work in general. So the history of prostitution and sex work, the legal status and how that has changed, adult sex workers, the politics of it again. It gets a little bit into teenagers and sex work and the difficult problem we have there, internet and sex work, customers of sex work, the personal cost. Personal cost is obviously the impact to the individuals engaging in it. Ways in which the world has sort of glorified the pimp and put the prostitute down, and that gender dynamic that's at play. And then it gets into worldwide sex trafficking. And trafficking is not, worldwide trafficking is not just about sex. There's lots of reasons for trafficking and impacts, but sex is one that we often hear about, and it's really important to be aware of as counselors. And so again, the end of the chapter goes over a little bit of a summary and some resources that you can look at on that topic. In addition, this week we have a couple chapters from Quickies. The first is chapter 2, Unique Problems, Unique Resolutions, the case of the bad orgasm, which kind of covers one specific case that the counselor worked with, so a couple, and it goes over that. The second chapter, which is chapter 3, the process of change in brief sex therapy, they actually talk about a couple cases, 3 different cases, and they go through how brief therapy was able to help them, kind of the process of change and the evolution and all of that stuff. So some interesting chapters to take a look at if you'd like to. I want to just go back to the module, so I'm covering everything that we have this week. And so with these 2 chapters in Crooks and Bauer, the PowerPoints are posted. So for chapters 14 and 18, for some reason I have 4 and 4 posted. I'll correct that. Then we have the Quickies. We have the resource guide from Bueller that is posted for you to look at. We have our first exam, our quiz this week. It's going to cover just chapters 2, 14, and 18 from the Crooks and Bauer book. And then we have that one supplemental chapter, chapter 1, that we read the first week of class from the WPM book, which is somewhere on my desk. Anyway, so it's going to cover all 4 of those chapters. So you make sure you want to focus on all 4 of those study guides in preparing for that exam. And then we have our podcast discussion this week. This one is going to cover some of the topics that we're talking about in Sex for Sale. And actually some of the stuff that we're going to talk about later in chapter 17. Again, I took that out of this week and added it and kept it just in week 7, but we're going to get a start on it with podcasts on surviving childhood sexual abuse, how to talk about childhood sexual abuse. And then there's one on tantric sex and sex surrogate. And the sex surrogate is something that you might read about in these chapters and want to learn a little bit more about. So there's that podcast. And so what you want to do is discuss what you've learned and how it relates to the material we've done in the readings. Obviously with sexual abuse, it's not going to be here this week. How do you feel this will impact you as a clinician and in your work with clients? What more do you feel like you need to learn about some of these topics that we've covered this week? Again, your initial post is going to be due on Thursday. There will be a reminder sent out for that. And then your any responses that you have to peers will be due on Sunday. You have to have at least one of those responses to peers to be substantial using the ABC method, which I've included in all of your discussion post prompts. So follow that ABC method: acknowledge, build, and contribute. And that, I believe, is it for week 3. So look out below for any additional resources I have for you. Have a great week, guys, and best wishes on the exam. If you have any questions before Friday, let me know. Otherwise, we will see each other again next week for our second Zoom meeting. Thank you.